Um, where are we at? We're in Second Kings, talking about Joash. This is an interesting, only time in the history of Israel that a woman was king over Israel, and she usurped that authority. She took that away from the Davidic lineage. So it's the only time in the history of Israel that occurred. She because that through Judah was her Christ would come through Samuel. He says, "On your throne," through the line of David, through the tribe of Judah. And this is a one point in history where that lineage just hung on by just a thread, just almost extinguished that line of David at this particular point in the history of Israel. And it was uh, because of Ahazi dying, and you got to go back a couple of chapters. That's where Jehu had killed him. Jehu's army, or Jehu had killed him, shot him in his chariot, had killed him, and so he was no longer alive, of course. And he destroyed a lot of the. She rose and she basically destroyed all of that lineage, all that offspring of Ahazi. But that was the Davidic lineage. That was the line that Christ would come through. So this is really a real pivotal point in Israel's history, because she killed, or she thought she killed, all of the offspring of David, all of that lineage, which would have extinguished that line, and that would have killed that prophecy of the Lord. So prophecy of God. So it's really one of those points. But when Josheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahazi, took Joash, the son of Ahazi, and stole him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and placed him and his nurse in the bedroom. So they hid him from Athaliah, and he was not put to death. So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord 6 years, while Athaliah was reigning over the land. So she took him. He was a baby. She took him. She hid him for 6 years, hid him away from being killed by Athaliah. So it was that was the only way she was going to preserve that lineage. But he's only a child, right? He's just a child. In the 7th year of Jehoiada, sent and brought the captains of hundreds of the Karaites of the guard, and brought them to him in the house of the Lord. Then he made a covenant with them, put them under oath. So now the priest is getting involved. The priest knows about this Davidic lineage, and the priest knows that he's going to facilitate maintaining this lineage, maintaining this throne. So the priest here has got involved, and he's called in these captains of the army and captains of the guard, and he's basically swore them under oath in the house of the Lord, and he showed them the king's son. This is almost like a movie, right? It's almost like one of the movie plots you see, where the king's son gets hidden off, and then saved by some miraculous way. And in the Bible, this has happened a few times, right? The lineage of Saul was only maintained because of Mephibosheth was the only reason that lineage was maintained. He was the only one that was left alive. So there's times throughout history that this has occurred, and this is the case here. But he's only a boy. He's only 7 years old, right? That's pretty young to be a king, I would think. 7. I didn't do a lot at 7. Can hardly remember 7, but I think 7 would be pretty young to be a king. But this priest is facilitating now, bringing him onto the throne. Even at 7 years old, he's facilitating bringing him on. And that's what that lineage meant, was that even at that age, they could assume that throne. So that's what this priest is doing, and he's enlisting these men. And he says, "This is the thing you shall do. 1/3 of you who come in on the Sabbath and keep watch over the king's house. 1/3 also shall be at the gate, sir, and 1/3 at the gate behind the guard shall keep watch over the house for defense." So he knows that if Athaliah finds this son alive, she will kill him, because that's how it was. She'd already killed all the other king's sons. So this is the last of the lineage. This is the last that's there to keep. So he's basically swore them to keep guard. Go out on the Sabbath, shall also keep watch over the house of the Lord for the king. And you shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand. And whoever comes within the ranks shall be put to death. And be with the king when he goes out and when he comes in. So the captains of hundreds did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and each one of them took his men who were to come in on the Sabbath, and those who were to go out on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. So he set this in motion now to maintain this lineage. You know, the lineage of David is really impressive in the Bible. The idea that God maintained that line for centuries while we were waiting for Jesus to come. We just finished Christmas, and we know that idea. We know about Joseph, and we know about Mary, and that's probably fresh on everybody's mind. But when you start to look at the Gospels, that lineage involved in those Gospels is all about this prophecy. And I know we get bogged down in those lineages, but in Luke chapter 3, if you look back at this, Luke goes in reverse order. So Luke starts with Joseph, doesn't he? The son of Joseph, son of Hillel. If you trace back this lineage through Luke, and you trace this back down, you'll see the son of Joshua, Elijah the son of Joram, Matthias the son of Levi, Simon the son of Judah, Joseph the son of Jonam. All this lineage that traces this back to Christ. And this is important, but the truth is, when you look at this lineage, and you look at this in Luke, and then you also look at it in Matthew, which is a little bit different lineage in Matthew than in Luke. When you begin to look at this lineage, you have to ask yourself, I think, some questions. Of course, Matthew 1, it's right at the beginning of Matthew, and it runs from Abraham. So Luke's lineage starts at Joseph and goes all the way to Adam. Matthew's lineage starts at Abraham and goes all the way down to, well, see, that's sort of the crux of these lineages. If Jesus was truthfully the Son of God, right, then, and he had the descendant of David, and Joseph wasn't his father, then technically, does Mary or Joseph have to be the descendant of David? Yeah, Mary has to be the descendant of David. You understand what I'm saying? Because technically Joseph isn't his father. So Mary actually has to be the lineage, not Joseph. So a lot of scholars think that Luke's lineage, which starts at Joseph and works back, and then if you look at Matthew's lineage starts at Abraham and also lists in this Mary. And some people, Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, called the Messiah. But if you'll look at, if you're in your Bible, if you look at Matthew, where it says Matthew goes through Nathan. So most scholars believe that that's actually Mary's lineage more than Joseph's lineage. And if you really trace that back, which is a long and arduous process, if you really trace that back, you'll see David and Nathan were related. David and the prophet Nathan. Nathan was David's prophet, right? Take my word for that. Nathan was David's prophet, right? All kings kind of had their main prophets. Well, Nathan was kind of David's prophet. After Samuel died, Nathan kind of became David's prophet. And Nathan and David were related. So if you trace that lineage back, which people have done, it really shows Mary coming from Nathan, from that lineage of David through Nathan, and then Joseph coming of that lineage through David. So either way, it goes back to that lineage of Christ. Either way you go, it traces back to that lineage is pure. And that prophecy of 2 Samuel 7, that one would sit on David's throne, is accurate. And that really is the primary focus of Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2. That was his primary argument about Christ being the Messiah, is that David's dead and buried, and his tomb's with us to this day. But David, being a prophet, spoke of the one which is to come, which is Christ. That's really the thrust of that sermon in 2 Peter. To me and you, that doesn't mean a lot, because we're not Jews. We really don't follow that lineage. But to the Jews that were there on the day of Pentecost, that was a powerful sermon. That was a powerful message. You know, this is the Son of David that you hung upon the cross. This is the Son of David. Now, we know he's not directly David's son, but you know how that works in the Bible. He's of that lineage that you put upon the cross. So it's really, really a big thing. And, you know, like I said, coming after Christmas, we look at that, Mary and Joseph, the miraculous birth of Christ. You know, that lineage had to be intact. And this is one point in history right now where that lineage was almost extinguished for good, was almost extinguished. So, anyway, that's for your listening enjoyment. Any questions about that? Yeah, there's a lot there. You're right. But, you know, prophecy, especially messianic prophecy in the Bible, is a big thing for us. You know, how do you know Jesus Christ is the Messiah? Because he said he was? Because he performed miracles? The Bible says there were other people who performed miracles, right, in those days. Others that rose up and claimed to be the Messiah and performed miracles. So there were others that could do that. Maybe not the miracles that Jesus did, but you remember, right, there were certain miracles he did that really got their attention. Did you really notice that in the Bible? There's certain miracles Jesus did that when he did it, they were like, wow. You remember one of those wow miracles? There's one that really comes to my mind. Huh? What? Healing the blind. That was a big one, right? Yep, John 9, healing the blind. Nobody's ever done that, right? That was a big thing, healing the blind. You remember another one he did that was a big, they said even what? Even what obeys him? Even the wind and the waves obey his will, right? He's got to be the Son of God. That was their explanation of that miracle, right? Truly, this is the Son of God, right? Even the waves obey his will. The idea that he could even control the weather. You know, that's a big miracle, isn't it? It's one we kind of pass over a lot because we're kind of focused on Peter being out of the boat and the waves. But, you know, for somebody to come out and say, you know, we live in Oklahoma. We're in the middle of the Tornado Alley, right? Or I think we used to be. I think they said it's headed to the east. That's nice for us. But anyway, you know, can you imagine in the midst of that storm, you know, Jesus just saying, be still, and everything just stops? I mean, that would be unbelievable to be able to control the weather. And yet that's what Jesus did. He controlled the storm. That was a huge, huge miracle, right? You know, we talk about, but a lot of the miracles Jesus did, and you know, we and Sam talked about that with Janus and Jambres. You know, the priests of Pharaoh. You know, Moses started out with these miracles that they duplicated, right? Threw down the staff, and they thought they could do that, right? And eventually he got up to miracles that are like frogs, that eventually he got it to miracles they couldn't duplicate. They were such a big miracle, such a grand scale, they couldn't. And we had some discussion about that I'm still looking into, about was that just illusion, right? Or was that actually some sort of a dark magic? You know, the miracles, you know, people were probably a lot more gullible back then. People probably were a lot more easily tricked, I would think, than maybe we are now, even though it seems we're tricked quite a bit, even yet. But a lot of those miracles were pretty convincing. If you read Acts chapter 8, Simon the sorcerer, right, said they thought he was a god, right? I mean, he was able to pull off some pretty good magic, pretty good illusion, whatever he did. He was pretty good at it, right? They called him Simon the sorcerer, so they attributed his deal to sorcery, to more of a dark magic, a dark art type thing. So, you know, we had the lady, the woman maiden in Acts, book of Acts, that was able to have the spirit of divination, that was able to foresee the future. Divination is what divination is, right? She was able to foresee the future, and they made great profit off of her. And the Bible never says that she wasn't able to do that effectively. They took that gift away from her, took that spirit away from her, right? That demon, that possession away from her. And the people who had her were upset because you've taken away our source of income, right? You've ruined this. You've ruined her, right? I mean, she can't tell the future anymore. So the Bible never does away with that idea. It says it exists. So miracles alone, does that really convince us of the Messiah? It didn't convince the Jews, and they saw those miracles, eyes on. And most of the Jews weren't convinced he was the Messiah, right? So miracles alone didn't do it. So what's your proof, right? What's your proof that he's the Messiah? Prophecy. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was a whole deal. You have to take the whole package. He did the miracles, he did the signs, he did the wonders. He fulfilled tons of prophecy, was resurrected from the dead. Right. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Uh-huh. So it's a whole body of proof that Jesus is the Messiah. You can't just take one thing and say, well, that makes the Messiah or this makes the Messiah. You have to take the whole body of evidence. You have to take the whole thing. The signs, the miracles, the prophecy, the resurrection from the dead, the witnesses. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Some will not believe it regardless. Right? Yeah. Well, Judas, right? Yeah. Yeah, Leela. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's something we should be convinced of, something we should know. And the Bible gives us a lot of evidences, a lot of proofs that he was exactly who he said he was, that he came at the right time, he was the right person to the right lineage, performed the right miracles, resurrected from the dead, hung on the cross for our sins. I mean, there's a huge body of evidence for us to draw on that says this is how it is. But, on the other hand, like Brent says, some people refuse to believe, and some people will refuse to believe. And sometimes it takes something in somebody's life to make them understand, I really need this in my life. I really need Christ in my life. And sometimes that's a life-changing event when that happens, and people come to that realization that I really need Jesus. I really need this. Um, so you just never know. Don't give up on people. I'll just tell you, there's people in my life I prayed for years and years and never thought they would ever admit that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and I've seen that happen. So never give up. You never know at what point in somebody's life they're going to realize that this is important. It's important to them, and I think that's something we have to continually think about. But like you say, we need, like Leela says, we need to have that evidence in our mind, that proof in our mind that I don't just believe Jesus is Messiah because my mama said it was, or my daddy said it was, or whatever. I believe it because I've studied it and I've come to a realization that this is true. This is truth. That's a big thing to come to that realization in your life. Are there any comments? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I've always said, years ago when I really started questioning my faith and what I believed, I started studying other faiths, Buddhism, Hindu, um, Islam, um, the five great faiths, right? The five great faiths, they say, right? Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hindu, and Buddhism, right? Five great faiths. And I studied all five of those faiths. It's quite a bit, actually. Spent a couple of years of my life on that project. And I come to a conclusion when I did that, and it's always been in the back of my head, but I always thought I wish that you could wipe your spiritual slate clean at some point. I wish we could go in with no preconceived ideas, none of our upbringing, none of our background, and we could put all those faiths on tables in that fellowship room, and you could walk in with no preconception and examine all five of those faiths and try to decide which one was the right one. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to look at all five of those faiths with open eyes and tried to say, if I didn't have a preconception in my life, which one of these would I believe would be true, and why would I believe that? And I don't have time to tell you that in 20 minutes this morning, but there's a reason I'm still where I'm at. There's a reason I'm still a Christian. Not because I haven't looked at other faiths, because I have. And not because I haven't talked to people who were involved in those faiths, because I have. But because I made a decision that this was the most real, this was the most true of what was there. That was my conclusion. I think it's easy to be lazy with faith. And I think a lot of people are kind of lazy with their faith. They believe what they believe because that's what they grew up believing, and that's just what they're going to believe. They're not going to change that. And I think, Clyde, you're right. If you go to a part of the world that's Hindu, you're going to, those people believe. Why do they believe that? Well, because mom and dad believed it. That's their society. That's what they grew up with. They don't question it. They just believe it. Why do most people in the United States, why are we Christians? Because that's what mom and daddy were. That's what our grandparents were. That's what we grew up with. And so we don't question it. We just believe it. Well, you need to question your faith. If it's true, then it's going to hold up to scrutiny. If it's not true, it's not going to hold up to scrutiny. I mean, do you have I think it's like that comedian I listened to, and I wish I'm going to put that clip up here someday, but anyway, it's what he said. He went golfing with a guy, and the guy says, what's your faith or whatever? And he says, well, I'm an atheist. And the guy I was golfing with, he says, so you've examined all the faiths of the world, and examined Christianity, and read the Bible, and you've come to a conclusion in your life that God does not exist. And he says, no. And he says, well, you're not an atheist, you're just lazy, right? Because it's easier to say there's no God than to come to a conclusion there is a God and then have to figure out what you're going to do about that, right? Because if you really believe there is a God and you really believe that God's active in our lives, then you have to come to some conclusion. What are you going to do about that? Sometimes it's easier just to say, oh, I'm an atheist, because if you do that, it's kind of like shutting the door on a dirty bedroom, right? If you got a dirty room in your house, in one of them trash rooms, right, and you throw everything in there and shut the door, as long as the door's shut, your house is clean. Am I right? Right? Until you open that door, your house is not dirty in your mind. When you open that door, your house is dirty again. Well, it's kind of that way with God. If we could put him in a place in our mind and shut the door and leave him in that room, then essentially we don't have to deal with him. right? But once you open that door and come to that conclusion that God exists and God is real and God is powerful, then you have to do something about it. So, in my opinion, over my studies and over a lot of things I've seen, is a lot of people in my life who profess to be atheists really are not. That's just the way they deal with life. It's not that they've really studied and really come to that conclusion. It's just that's the easiest way out. It's the easiest way out until you die. At that point, it's not that easy. But up to that point, it's the easiest. It's the easiest solution, right? So we're way off track this morning. It's all right. But anyway, anybody can add anything to this you want to along the way. Just spout it right out there. But I think the reason we come to the fact of Jesus being who Jesus is a body of evidence, not just a single thing. Not just he did a miracle, not just he calmed the storm, not just he was born to the lineage of David, because a lot of people were born to the lineage of David. It has to be a body of stuff. He was born at the right lineage, at the right time in history. That's a really big thing. If you read Daniel, Jesus almost had to be born when he was born to fulfill the prophecy of Daniel. Almost had to be. The Jews knew that. They knew it. They were looking. You don't really see that in the Bible, but you do a little. But because if you look, there's a couple places in the Bible that says people were coming out to claiming to be the Messiah, and people were following them. Why was that happening at that particular point in history? Because according to Daniel's prophecy, that's when the Messiah was supposed to come. And they were under Roman oppression, and they thought it's like people today. It's as bad as it can get, right? The Messiah's got to come because this can't get any worse because they're under Roman oppression. It's like people say today, the world's so bad, Jesus has got to come again because it can't get any worse, which is totally a wrong idea. But nevertheless, so they were looking for him. There was a time. So it's not just the lineage, it's the time. Timing was a big part of Jesus being the Messiah. It was the timing. And then, like you say, it was the miracles he performed, the signs, the wonders, the words that he spoke, the prophecy that he fulfilled, the huge body of prophecy that he fulfilled. Being born of a virgin, being born in Bethlehem, being born, Micah 5:2, right? He had to be born in Bethlehem, had to be born in David's lineage, 2 Samuel 7, had to be born to a virgin, Isaiah chapter 7, had to be, all the things he fulfilled in his death. Look at Psalms 22, right? All the words he spoke at his death, cast lots for his clothing, sneered, wagged their tongue finger at him, says, why can't he save himself? The very words uttered from the cross, first verse of Psalms 22, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Came right out of the 22nd Psalm. Isaiah, right? Suffering servant passage of Isaiah. Came as a sheep to be slaughtered, with a lamb, like a lamb going to the shears, right? Did not open his mouth. The idea that he didn't defend himself, didn't stick up for himself, that he went to the cross. Galatians 3, he became a curse, being hung upon a tree. Like Buck says, a fulfillment of his own prophecy. In the book of John, if I'm raised up, I will draw all men to myself, he says in John. Telling the kind of death that he was going to die, right? In 3 days, I'll rise again, basically, right? In 3 days. I'm telling you this now so that when it happens, you'll believe that it's so. We're talking about a huge body of evidence that says Jesus Christ is the Messiah, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, all this has been fulfilled. So it's really it's a big thing to hang your hat on. Like Brent says, not everybody's going to believe it. And there's a point where faith has to take over. I totally understand that. There's a point where you have to say, I have the faith to believe this is true. And I understand that. But on the other hand, there is a huge body of evidence also that supports what we believe. And I think it's important we know that. Yeah, so we have help with that, right? And the Bible says we have to seek it, right? He says, if you seek, you'll find. If you knock, it will be open. The idea that we have agency, we have a part, we have a role to play in our salvation. Yeah, you got to want it. Mm-hmm. Every knee shall bow, every mouth will confess, Philippians, Jesus Christ is Lord. That's Sydney's favorite verse of the Bible, by the way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway, any comments about all that? So he's swearing these people to protect him, even though this priest is young. And he gave them spears and shields that had been King David's. These are things that were in the temple, in the house. Remember, David built a lot of shields, a lot of spears. Most of this is going to be sold off. We'll get into that a little bit pretty soon. But he gave him a lot. Gave these out to these warriors, and he set them to guard him by the altar, by the house, around the king. And he brought the king's son out and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony. They made him king and anointed him and clapped their hands and said, "Long live the king." So very movie-esque idea here. But so he's 7, right? He's 7. He's king of Israel. He's 7 years old. So he's an overachiever, right? So it says, when Athaliah heard the noise and the people, she came to the people in the house of the Lord. She looked, and behold, the king was standing by the pillar, according to the custom, with the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people rejoiced. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason, treason." That's an amazing thing for her to say. She's the one that usurped the throne and killed off all the king's lineage. But now that the real king shows up, she's like, "Treason, treason." So, she really reminds you of Jezebel. She's related to Jezebel, right? She's related to Jezebel. So she kind of reminds you of Jezebel a little bit. And Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains and the hundreds who were appointed. The army said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows her, put her to death with the sword." For the priest said, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." So they seized her. When they arrived at the horses' entrance, she was put to death. And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they would be the Lord's people, and also between the king and the people. This was an interesting kingship, because as long as the priest stays alive, Joash is going to be a pretty good king. A lot of things are going to happen because he's under that tutelage of Joash. He's under that tutelage of the priest. Unfortunately, when he dies, his kingship is going to suffer. And that maybe is because of his age or the influence that's around him. But at this point in time, the priest is really governing, because he's only 7 years old, right? So the priest is really telling him what to do, and the priest is moving things in God's direction because the priest has influence, which is a good thing at this particular time in history. So they tore down the Baal. Once again, this thing's built over and over, right? I mean, this thing gets tore down. A king comes up that's good, he tears it down. The other ones come up, they build it up. They killed Mattan the priest before the altars. So they're purging, once again, purging Israel of this. He took the captains, all the people of the land. They brought the king down to the house of the Lord, and they rejoiced. The city was quiet. He had Athaliah put to death, and Joash was 7 years old when he became king. So in the 7th year of Jehu, you got to remember, Jehu's in Israel, so don't get that confused. This isn't Israel, right? This is Judah. We got 2 tribes. We're split tribes. So the 10 tribes of Israel, the northern tribes, Jehu, he's the one that killed Joram and killed Ahaziah, the king of Judah, killed both the kings. So Jehu is over Israel. He's in the northern tribes now. And Joash is over Judah and Benjamin, southern tribes. So there's 2 different groups here. He reigned 40 years. His mother's name was Abiah of Beersheba. And he did right in the sight of the Lord all his days, in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. And that's very important, because when the priest dies, he's going to go the wrong way. So as long as he had that influence in his life of the priest, he did good. A lot to be said for that. Influence of people around you, right? As long as he had that good influence, he did good. But what's going to happen is Jehoiada is going to die. So Joash's big project is this rebuilding the temple, the money. So he gets this chest and he puts a hole in it. He puts it by the deal. And basically the first time he just tells the priest, he said, all the money people bring, keep it and pay to get the house fixed, which is the temple. Now you got to remember, the temple, it oftentimes gets in disrepair. Um, and this is the original temple. This is Solomon's temple. So this is the original temple. And so he wanted to get it rebuilt. That was his big project to do it. It says, any man's heart prompts him, bring it into the house of the Lord. But the priests didn't do it. They didn't repair it. He said that's what he wanted him to do. He says, repair the damage where it may be found. And in the 23rd year of the king, the priests had not repaired the damages. So basically, he said, have people give extra money, and you priests are responsible, and you fix up the temple. But the priests didn't do it. So, because I guess they kept the money for themselves. That's the best thing I can tell you right now. They didn't do it. So Joash said, well, let's do this. We'll put a chest, we'll bore a hole in it, and when people come in, and the other money that the priests don't normally get, we're going to dump it in the hole in this chest, and we're going to take that money, and we're going to rebuild the house of the Lord. So that was a big thing. So that's what they're doing. They're going to take the money, pay for the damages. So the priests agreed they would take no more money from the people, nor repair the damages. So he took the priests out of the equation. He put this chest with a hole in it by the altar, and people brought the money in. And when they got money in it, then the chief scribe, they went up, they put it in bags, they counted it, they hired these people to fix the house. And then when the money, after they got things fixed, the other money that was left, they used to put the articles back in. And that's kind of hard to read in the middle of this, but they took the maces, the stone cutters, the timber. There were not made for the house of the Lord silver cups, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, vessels of gold, or vessels of silver from the money which was brought to the house of the Lord. For they gave that to the house who did the work, and with it they repaired the house of the Lord. So basically, they weren't doing the furnishings till the house was built, but they did, and they were putting these gold articles back in. A lot of this stuff had been plundered out of the temple, had been taken away from the temple. The temple got plundered a lot because there was a lot of wealth in there. And when you would have evil kings, they couldn't protect it, and the temple would get plundered, and stuff would get in disrepair. And Joash's big project was to rebuild that and put those articles back in there and do all that stuff. And that all worked good as long as Jehoiada the priest was alive. But what's going to happen is Jehoiada is going to die. The money for the guild offerings, all this, basically is talking about the money, the rebuilding of the temple. Hazael, if you remember him from several chapters back, the king of Syria, Aram, he went out and fought against Gath and captured, and Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And then, this is kind of the sad legacy of Joash. He spent all that time and money rebuilding the house, rebuilding putting the articles back in. You can see at the beginning of this, some of King David's stuff was still there. He gave them the weapons, the shields of King David, so there was wealth of the kings was still involved here. And Joash, to keep the Syrians from overtaking Jerusalem, Joash plunders all that stuff he had done, plunders the temple, takes all the gold, all the articles, gives it to Hazael, the king of Syria, so Hazael won't attack Israel. He buys him off with all the stuff out of the temple, and he undoes all the work basically that he did, he undoes it to keep Syria from invading Israel. And that's because at this point, see all this wealth, Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, Jehoshaphat, they took all these articles and his own sacred things and the gold, and he gave them to the king, to give them to Hazael so that he went away so he wouldn't attack him. The rest of the acts of Joash, all that he did, are not written in the book of Chronicles. And to get the rest of the story, you got to read Chronicles. And Chronicles talks about after how Jehoiada died, that basically Joash started doing evil things and bad things, and that's why he had to plunder the house. And eventually he gets so far off track that they conspire against him. His own people conspire against him and kill him, because he gets so far away from the Lord and the other way, because he's lost the influence of the priest. So his legacy is not good. His servants arose, made a conspiracy, struck down Joash at the house of Millo as he's going down to Syria. So if you put Chronicles with Kings, which we didn't do, but if you go to Chronicles and read that account and read the King's account and put that all together, basically the life of Joash, he was a really good king as long as the priest, Jehoiada, was alive. When the priest died, Joash turned away from the Lord, turned back to other things, and when he did that, he became evil in the sight of the Lord. He had to rob everything out of the temple to pay off the king of Syria so Syria wouldn't invade. And he got so far away from God that his own servants eventually killed him because he turned so far away from the Lord. And that's the legacy of King Joash. All right, I've given you all I got about this morning. Thanks for your time.